All right, everybody, welcome back to another conversation. And this is a conversation that Ryan and I have talked about a lot, and probably going back a year and a half, 2 years ago. And now we're finally getting together to have this conversation. And so Ryan Pagella and Rachel Cook are here from Love is an Open Door to talk about Disney's portrayal of trauma in their movies and in their projects. So we have a few projects that we're going to talk about, but this is more of a free ranging conversation that we can have about just what Disney or how Disney portrays trauma and what we as consumers, as viewers, can learn from those movies that we watch and the projects that we enjoy. So, real quick, and Rachel, we'll start with you. Give your real quick intro, sort of your origin story of your Disney fandom, how you got to where we are.
Okay. So I'm Rachel. I've been a fan of Disney media for most of my life. Like all millennial kids, I grew up on those big clamshell VHS tapes. I fell in love with the parks at a really young age. I moved to Orlando as an adult and I moved to Florida and then later to Orlando. I've lived here in Orlando specifically for about 8 years now and kind of go to the parks as I can, try to stay informed of Disney news in general, but particularly park news, because I find them particularly fascinating. But there's obviously a lot of movies and other media that I'm really interested in as well.
Okay. Real quick, Rachel, did you see the news this morning that they are from the Living Seas or the Seas Pavilion? They're moving
Mhm.
some of the dolphins and the manatee.
Yeah, so I just saw that news. That's really sad to hear about the dolphins. I actually haven't seen them out much over the past few years. Usually when I go to the living seas there or the seas, they're not out, but when they are out, it's really nice. So that's a shame. I wonder what they'll do with that space because that's a really large space for just the dolphins. And yeah, I saw one of the manatees is being relocated, which is he being where is he being moved to another aquarium or is he being rehabilitated?
I think what I saw, it seems like it might be temporary.
Okay.
Um, but they're also I think maybe moving the manatee. Maybe there's
Yeah.
another one that they're kind of going to house while this one is out. I'm
Yeah.
not.
I mean, it's sad that the Dolphins are leaving. It's, people really get have gotten really attached to the two manatees that are there. I know Disney as a company, I don't trust everything they do. I don't trust everything they say, but when it comes to animal care and conservation, they've proven that they care about adhering to the latest science and making sure that the animals are well cared for. So I trust that they're probably doing whatever is in the best interest of the animals that are in their care. But yeah, no, that's sad to hear about the dolphins because those were always really nice to see.
So
Yeah.
wait, I missed this news. Like, are they've decided to remove them? Is that what's going on? It's
I
like,
think
The
or are they replacing it with something? Like, what's the actual reason for it happening?
I
You
will I
know?
will here, I'll tell you what.
Okay.
Ryan, give your quick intro. I will find the story because it tells where they're going. So go.
Okay. Well, is this my fourth or fifth time here,
This
Cody? Do
is
you
your
know?
fourth time. So the
Okay.
next
Whoa.
time, you're
I'm
part
in
of
the
the
five
Five
timers
Timers Club.
club. Yeah, right.
You get a little jacket like in SNL.
That's right. We
Actually,
should make jackets. I've been
actually,
arguing for that actually. So
actually, let me remember how to do this. Um, oh, there it is. So you two, and I guess everybody else will see it as well. Um, Here is the Five Timers jacket,
oh,
There's a
oh,
real
can
and
I?
jacket.
well, it's
I
a
like
real
the five
picture of a
stars.
jacket. Now, or is this better? I kind of like this one.
Yeah, but I would have never wear that. So
Well,
Like, I
Mhm.
well,
think
you're
I think you need to just have both and then be like, which do you prefer? Unless you're
Mhm.
like, well, because you're not going to produce them in bulk because I'm assuming you're doing it through like an online service. So,
well, no, here's the thing, Ryan, you're not going to wear either one of them. They're an NFT, if you will. I'm sure they don't count as
okay.
yeah. There's-
All
so
right. I thought you were going to
so
be like, see, I have
Hold.
a friend that like makes like Five Timer Club's mugs for her podcast, which is Convention Confessional. I don't know if it's still going, but that was the thing she was doing for a while.
well,
It was smart because
now I'm kind of shamed into doing it. I feel like
I was like, wow, Cody's buying us like hats and jackets. This is crazy. I'm just showing up and talking about like Lilo and Stitch and sometimes the X-Men. Like, but yeah, I
um
mean, well, so this is my fourth time here, so I
yeah.
kind of feel like I'm becoming more like I'm moving up the chain here. So for your students or listeners that are have been here for a while or going through your classes and watching them, I feel like eventually I become that character that's like a consistent cameo character on a sitcom that comes in for an episode and then you don't see them for a while, and then eventually I'm just like a main character on the show.
But one of those that has such a presence that people are like, he's only been in 5 episodes.
hmm and a presence that he can shame the host into to producing jackets and hats and sending
Yeah,
those out. So
mm, I know.
um
I am very persuasive, but I've been here for like four of these, so I'll keep it brief. Longtime Disney fan. Didn't go to Disney World until I was in my late teens, like 19, 20, something like that. We just didn't do that as a kid. But I grew up watching all the movies, consuming all the Disney stuff and media. And over the years, I took a break from Disney. I got into other stuff for a while in my early teens when I decided that anime was cooler than Disney. Now I just like them both. Um, and as Rachel knows, we met at a convention where we were both cosplaying from Kingdom Hearts, which really brings those two things together. I think Rachel might be frozen again. Um, oh no, she's not. She was just standing very
she's just
still.
very being very
No, you
still.
guys were frozen for a second. Don't.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, this is gonna be a fun episode. Um, but yeah, so I've been super into Disney, and like I've worked in the media field for a very long time at this point. Right now I do marketing, but I have the podcast with Rachel Loves an Open Door. I've got the Mutant Ages, which is my other podcast. I do have a YouTube channel dedicated to theme park exploration and that stuff. I don't know if I'm continuing it. It's been a hiatus for a long time, but there's and Disney obviously falls into that category. I'm a big fan of Disney parks, like really big fan. Rachel and I have extensive conversations about that more than the actual content itself. Um, but yeah, that's kind of like sort of where I land in the Disney spectrum. Um, so yeah, I'm not going to do any rapid fire questions that I just right now because I know you'll just ask them later. But also, it would be cool if like some of your listeners or students are like they remember my answers when you ask them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
They so well actually they're different. They're different
I
this
know they
time.
are, but
So
but they weren't initially. Initially, you were kind of asking the same sets of questions when you
yeah.
started the show, and now you're like, oh crap, I've got these people who keep on coming back to the show. I can't keep on asking them what their favorite Disney movie and attraction is. We know what they are.
Maybe it changes.
Yeah,
So here's the manatee is it's a manatee swap. So they're going to another it doesn't the article I see, it doesn't tell
Man,
where they're going.
okay. And this is just a rhetorical question.
it's called
I
a
don't,
manatee swap. Like, are
yeah,
we trading them? It's like,
yeah,
are
that's
we
my thing.
getting
It's like when you do like a prisoner swap, it's like it's something like in exchange for something, or when you do like student exchange, the
much
idea is it
much darker
benefits both
take, Rachel?
parties.
I was like,
No,
we're
no,
gonna
no.
trade Pokemon. Like, what's happening here?
Right, right. Well, what's the benefit? That's my question though, is what is the benefit of the manatee swap? Like
So
a
what
Pokemon trade, you understand what the benefit is.
You're getting a better manatee, right?
I think
Right.
there's
there
no
so
there's no
there's
such thing as a manatee that's better than another manatee. Just
Right. I
say.
feel like all manatees are on roughly equal footing.
so it
Oh,
says Lou, a fan favorite manatee, will be relocated to another Florida-based rehabilitation center.
Okay.
Um, so I don't know what the benefit is. Maybe the benefit is that like you're just in a different facility, so you get different care? Because it does sound like whoever, like, they are sending a manatee to Disney. Disney is sending Lou to this center. So maybe there's something that like this center does better,
Is
that
Maybe.
anything?
Lou
It's
needs. I don't know.
there's other things in that tank, right? Or am I? No, there aren't. I'm
No, it's
thinking
just
of
two manatees.
yeah.
The
What are
And
they going to do with that space? Is my question.
well, they're
That's
not they're gonna keep the dolphins are what
yeah.
are leaving completely. The manatees are staying. They're
oh,
just swapping out
okay.
one of the
Got it. Got it.
manatees for
Got it.
another manatee. But the dolphin space is even larger and there's
Yeah,
nothing else in there but dolphins. And I think like occasionally a fish from the larger aquarium next to it will like sneak in, but
that's where
it's
the
mostly
Monsters
just the
Inc. ride is going to
dolphins.
go.
There you go. Uh, the Dolphins are going to the Gulfarium Marine Adventure Park in Fort Walton Beach. So
Okay.
Okay. All
that's
right.
where they're going.
Where's
Um,
Fort Walton Beach?
Fort Walton, isn't that it's in the that was in the maybe it's in the Panhandle?
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Okay, I
Now
don't know a lot about the
I'll have to edit
panhandle.
all of this
It's
out
okay.
because I'm sure I
It's
got
okay.
that wrong. Um, Let me see. Well, that doesn't help me. Yeah, it's in the Panhandle. It's close to Destin.
Okay.
So
Okay.
like
Interesting.
between Destin and Pensacola. So um but so what the three of us are we're originally going to talk about today is
I feel like I just can't help myself from going off the rails, and then I get everybody to go off the rails. That is my true superpower in life.
I call it going off. I call it taking a an exit and then getting back on the interstate. When you so let's get back on the interstate.
All right,
Okay.
We
the one by Rachel because that one's crazy.
well, that one's stop and go, right?
What is that? Is it I-9? Is that what it is?
I-4.
I-4.
I-4, that one's just super
It
crowded all the time.
Yeah,
depends on what part you're on and what time of day, like any highway.
that's true.
The like when we first started talking about this, and Ryan, you're really the person who brought this up first, is we started talking about how Disney portrays trauma because you made the comment that really trauma has become the villain of Disney movies. Like throughout Disney's history, going back to, Snow White, Cinderella, like all of the older movies, characters dealt with trauma, usually in the form of, their parents dying early in the movie or before we see them on screen or things like that. But there was a traditional villain in those movies. Some of the
Right.
more recent movies over the last probably 7 or 8 years, um, they haven't really been doing that as much. And so that's kind of what got us on this topic. So the first thing to start with is what is just kind of talk a little bit about what trauma is and what generational trauma and specifically what generational trauma is. Either one.
Yeah. I mean, well, trauma, we know what trauma is, I think. I think that's the easiest thing to explain. Where trauma is psychological damage that's caused by the exposure of like a traumatic event, which could be anything ranging from like, you were assaulted, you were attacked, or like somebody says something mean to you, or like, you were in grade school and like people picked on you and like, just like anything that could happen. You saw an animal get hit by a car one day. Like trauma really could be anything. It's basically how your brain processes like an event. And there's basically like a few ways your brains can process events, right? Like it's going to be like, oh, it's something happy, it's something sad, it's something that makes you angry. And those sad and angry ones are basically usually trauma, just like on different levels of it. And I want to point this out because like in Disney films, specifically, it really is never one consistent kind of trauma, except for generational trauma, which is when it's trauma passed down from one generation to another. So, like, great example, parents, right? I won't specifically cite mine, but I guess you could. You could really cite any of ours because they all do it. Because it's something that like we're only recently breaking in a psychological standpoint in the current time, like the present right now. We're just really addressing this exists where like our parents' trauma, unless all the stuff that they dealt with, or I guess haven't dealt with, uh, gets passed down onto us and the way that they bring us up and the way that they interact with us and engage with us. And it makes it difficult because this is something that's been going on forever. So, like, my parents' generation, for example, are reacting to things in the exact same way that their parents did because their parents brought them up that way. And
Mhm.
this has been going on consistently for generations, for centuries. And our generation right now, we're talking about like, I mean, I can't speak to everybody in terms of age, but like, people around my age in their 40s and a little bit older are like trying to break that cycle. That's like, because now that we know a lot more about mental health in the past 10, 15 years or so that we didn't previously have information on, it has helped us really analyze that this is a consistent thing that's happening. And what we're trying to do, and I would love to hear about how you guys manage it as parents because I'm just a single dog dad. Although I guess you could argue Lyra has some trauma from when I was with my ex. It's like what we're trying to do now is try to not bring our kids up in the same way that our parents were bringing us up, which was a response to how they were brought up and their
Mhm.
parents and our grandparents and how they were brought up over and over again. And it's not just like a family thing too, because if you're looking like even like at a political landscape, a lot of what's happening is like older generations stubborn, don't want to change anything. They're taking out their trauma on like the world. It could be a work thing. It just, I mean, but that is what the generational trauma is. Like you're looking at like people that are like 60 to 80, for example, like projecting their emotions and their inability to manage them um, onto their kids or other people around them that are younger than them, like 20 years younger than them. And that is what generational trauma is. And that is something that we've seen pretty consistently in Disney films in the past 10 years when they were trying to get away from the classic Disney villain that basically like was composed of queer coding villains and making that just seem very queer in a lot of ways. Which we talked about this on your thing, Cody, when we first like really met and talked. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like those queer villains, like they were kind of great because at least we had queer representation. Because now we just don't have it. But like and that's kind of what's replaced the villain in Disney films, which is I think is a fair way for Disney to manage that because their villains before were like what society projected as bad back in the day, which is more than just being queer. It could be like, being like fat or something stupid like that. And now we're like kind of addressing what all that really is, and that is just actually trauma responses. And this has been in Disney films for a while. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about Lilo and Stitch, but like more recently, I think you can look at something like Encanto and Strange Worlds. Rachel and I just did an episode on Encanto, and it was supposed to be about the queer coding, but really we just started talking about generational
Yeah,
trauma. So
I think Encanto is like if someone were to ask me and like I'm not I'm not like a expert, like I don't have a degree in like psychology or have studied it extensively, but I know that like trauma responses are like one of the big things is that they're not always rational. And I think a lot of what's going on with this election for a lot of people is a trauma response, not to get political, but like I recognize that in a lot of people and a lot of the kind of
yeah,
responses to
I
things.
mean and
Um,
I was saying the same thing. I was
and
like, yeah,
yeah, yeah, with and like with generational trauma, if somebody were to come to me and say like what is generational trauma, and I would say, well, first of all, I'm not a psychologist, but second of all, watching Kanto, and Kanto is like baby's first, like if somebody if
baby's first generational
right,
trauma
well, no,
lesson.
if somebody were like if somebody came to me and said teach a class on generational trauma to like a bunch of college freshmen, I'd probably just the first day I'd probably just show them Encanto, because it is such a clear cut metaphor for how the trauma of like an earlier generation can affect the subsequent generations who aren't even going through the same challenges. Like by the time we get to the modern era of the movie, the danger, the explicit danger has passed. It happened. It was horrible to the grandmother. Her children didn't experience it. Her grandchildren didn't experience it. And yet, like everything she learned from that, like everything that her body learned from and her psyche from what happened to her is affecting her kids and affecting her family. And the movie reflects that in a very literal way. Frozen to a lesser extent, I think Encanto is good because it shows like several different like
Hmm.
layers of that. Frozen is kind of it's a little more intimate of a story. How like it's like more like point A, point B, like this thing happened to Elsa's parents, and now like it got passed to Elsa. Whereas like Encanto was like the grandmother, and then like here's her kids, and it affects that each of them a different way, and it affects each of their kids a different way. Um, but like that's the big thing is like I like Louise is a really good example in Encanto of like how like she has all these gifts. She has like nothing to really worry about. Like everything is
Hmm.
pretty much like fine for her. And she still is just like constantly afraid. And Isabella too, but like I think like especially the song Surface Pressure really shows like how like Louisa is just so tightly wound and like there's nothing like immediately putting her in danger and she is still just like constantly in fear of losing like and not being like and not and like losing this position that she has in this family.
Yeah. The interesting thing about Encanto is, Rachel, you said like if you were to teach an introductory class about what all of this is, that Encanto was one of the first movies that that really resonated with me. That I actually and it's interesting you talk about surface pressure and Louisa. We sat down, we got ready to watch the movie, and then like, we had I think we went like over lunchtime or something. So like the boys were eating lunch at the movies. And so I get a message that like the food's ready. I go out and I get the food. When I come back, that song, like I sit down and then that song Surface Pressure starts. So I
I
didn't
like how
really
you
know
like
like,
left like this is
well,
parenting right here. You gotta like, oh, we need to go
Oh,
get
they're
food.
fine. They're not going anywhere. They're
No, no,
watching
no,
a
no,
no,
no.
no,
movie.
I'm like it's like you
but
just miss a chunk of the movie.
well, I mean that happens. That
Yeah.
happens a lot. You go see things multiple times if you want to like watch the movie. If you want to see things, you go and you watch multiple times and you'll get everything. But so I didn't have context. Like I probably missed, the 2 minutes leading up to that song.
Hmm.
And as soon as that song starts and I like started hearing those words, I was like, oh my gosh, what
Yeah.
is, and all of a sudden it just like
It's also
it
a
hit
great
me.
song.
It's such a
Yeah,
great
it's an
song.
It's
amazing
so
song.
good.
And
Um,
when she's saying like basically like if you can't handle the pressure, like if I can't handle the pressure, what am I worth? And I was like, oh my good.
right.
And
She doesn't
so
even have an identity outside of that
yeah.
pressure.
And so the movie Encanto was the one that real like when Ryan first brought this topic up, I thought of Encanto.
Hmm.
That's the movie I
Might
always
have been
think
where like
about.
we started the thought
It
process, honestly.
Yeah, it probably was. And what's so interesting to me about that is for me watching the movie, at first it seems like the obviously the way they wrote it, Bruno is supposed to be kind of the first person that people think maybe is the villain. And then you find out no, it's not. It's actually the grandmother. And then through the song Dos Gatos, like that you kind of then you're like, well, she's going through her own struggles as well. And yes, like her struggles became her family struggles, but like she's going through that as well. And so then it's kind of like, okay, there's not really like what is the trauma? The trauma is the original action and like fear of losing this family's power and like losing the ability to protect their community and everything. So that's what's really, really interesting to me in Encanto. So let's real quickly talk about a few of the characters. First, start with the grandmother.
Hmm.
since that's kind of where we end up in the movie, seeing like she's the one who's passing all this down. But then where does that balance with the fact that what she went through, like should she have, I guess, handled it before she passed it down to generations? Or like how, how does the movie kind of portray that? And go ahead.
I I mean, like there's really no clear cut answer, and I do think the movie, like, just because it's a Disney movie, it's a kids movie, it has to be a certain length, under a certain length, like it kind of glosses over the healing, which can take years and years and years once you, and that's only after you recognize that there's a problem. So many times, like they won't like. It's hard for people to recognize that there's a problem and that they're perpetuating a problem, because it would have been really easy for her to say, like, I think if in real life, which this, has magic in it, but in real life, she probably would have been way less likely to be like, oh my God, you're right. I've been
Mhm.
like hurting my family and causing everybody to like go crazy. And I think in real life, she would have gone, no, I was doing it to protect everybody. I did what I had to do. Um, and it would have taken a lot more work to get her to recognize the harm that she was causing, the fact that she was the one who drove her son away, and she is the reason Mirabelle didn't get a gift. She's the reason the house is falling apart. And that house, like, just be as a metaphor. We talked about this on our podcast with Ryan, but like just the house as a metaphor for like the family's fragility and like how it literally represents their bond, and when their bond starts to crack, the house will literally fall apart. Like, oh my
Yeah,
God,
the
it's
house is like a victim in this
amazing.
also, like in
Mhm.
addition to all
Right,
the
right.
other people who get
The house
affected by
didn't
this.
refuse. The house isn't the thing that refused to give Mirabelle the gift. The house isn't to blame. The house is as much of a victim of the the problem as everyone else is. It's really incredible. Yeah, I could do like a whole other episode just about this, and I know we have a lot of other movies we want to talk
No,
about.
I know. And Rachel and
Um,
I, we just recently did an episode on it too. And I can't get over how we edited that episode where Rachel pitched like a super dark concept to me, which was like as soon as these people get their powers, she's sitting there and being like, not Rachel, she is
the
in like
grandmother
the grandmother being like, how can I use this? Is like
immediately. It's
every
so
time. And it's
creepy.
so dark to think about that this is all, and it's not all she cares about. I mean, at the end of it, I mean,
Right.
like,
And she's not doing it diabolically. She's like, this is
no,
like, and
it's
and
her
I
trauma.
watched, there's a YouTuber I watch sometimes named her name is Mickey Atkins. She's a social worker. She's a therapist. And she did a video on Encanto when it first came out. And she talked about how like a lot of, especially like a lot of immigrant families or families that came from like difficult circumstances that kind of worked their way up to better circumstances, the trauma doesn't really leave them, and how it manifests is this feeling of like we always have to re-earn everything we have
Hmm.
over and over and over and over again. So that's why like when Antonio gets his gift, she takes like a minute to celebrate, and then immediately like she
Hmm.
gives herself like one night, and then immediately she's like, how can we use this? And she's not doing it like I want to exploit you, like, she's doing it like this, if I don't do this, then we haven't earned it. And that's like explicitly stated in the opening song as well, like that she has to keep earning it. It's not enough to have it. They have to prove that they're worthy of it again and again.
Brian, do you have,
So
oh, go ahead.
oh, go
Sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead.
No, Rachel, go ahead.
I got nothing else. I got nothing else.
Brian, do you have anything to add?
To Encanto, I mean, we talked so much about this that I feel like we would be rehashing a lot of that. And I think Rachel has done an excellent job at like summarizing our thoughts on that. But something I do want to point out about it that we didn't even talk about in our show is that because we come at from the queer coding lens and sort of how that is affected. And like we talked a lot about how the grandmother is like purposely pushing a lot of her kids in back into the closet, and like that is like a whole conversation we had. But like all those kids, I mean, we're focusing on like like Mirabelle, Isabella, Luisa, like we're looking at them, but it really, those are just the grandchildren. Like this is, so you're seeing the multiple generations here. So like, yeah, those are their grandkids, but then their parents also suffered from this as well. Oh my God, I'm gonna look this up real quick, and you're gonna have to just deal with me because I'm blanking on her name. Who's the weather one?
Peppa.
Peppa. Peppa is consistently told throughout the whole movie that she needs to keep her emotions in check. Like, so if she has any emotion at all, like, her grandmother, her mother is like,
The only emotions she's allowed to show are happy ones,
Yeah.
which is
yes,
like a thing people are told in real life, but the
that is,
actual
and yeah, sorry,
consequences of it, but the actual consequences of it, this is really brilliant. I don't know if we
we did
like
it,
got
we
it.
did
Yeah, like
it.
because like she has to keep her emotions in check because literally if her emotions get bad, then the weather will get bad.
Yeah.
And you could kind of like I could see where somebody might make the argument of like, well, then that kind of falls apart because there are actual consequences to her being like negative, having negative emotions. But then at the end of the movie, she kind of becomes like Elsa in a way, like where she learns to kind of control her powers in a way
Storm from
where
the X-Men,
like
right?
like at the end she and her husband are dancing in a hailstorm, and like I think like before she would have found like a hailstorm to be shameful because it means she's having certain emotions, and she's kind of learned how to embrace like that she doesn't have to be happy all the time, that it's okay to have like kind of bad weather sometimes.
That's a great example of generational trauma too, because it's been for centuries. We have been not centuries, maybe a couple centuries, but like we have been doing this thing where like we're like telling our kids to repress their feelings and all that, and we're now in a generation where we're being told where we're figuring out like that's wrong.
Yeah, and
Like,
and as a parent of like a 4 year old, I'm like I come into this like okay, I want her to be able to express her emotions, but y'all 4 year old emotions
but also, yeah, like
are
there
a
needs to be
lot to deal
boundaries.
with, and you do yeah you well it's like she has to be allowed to express her emotions. She cannot be allowed to harm people. She cannot be allowed to like do dangerous things to herself or to others. But but like then there is that like instinct of, and I wasn't a kid who was like discouraged from showing emotion, but it's just kind of, there's also like societal pressure and like maybe societal trauma of eh, like not wanting to inconvenience others with her emotions and feeling like her emotions are a reflection of my my parenting skills, and maybe if I was a better parent she would just be happy all the time. So yeah, this is like it's hugely relevant hugely relevant to me in my life.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's why I was curious, like how you guys landed on this, because, like as I said, I'm not a human parent, so I don't know. I don't have personal experience with this.
you you know what's really interesting is with especially in sports. And there are other activities, but like in sports where I guess the societal norm has always been to if you're hurt, like you play through it, or if you're
Yeah,
hurt, you deal with the pain.
yeah,
And you know what's interesting, like Rachel talking about finding boundaries, like there you want, and not just like I'm the coach of my boys teams also. So not just with my boys, but with the other kids on the team, like you want to know if somebody's hurt, right? You want to know if somebody's hurt and if they cannot play. Um, there also are those boundaries that it's like if you're playing baseball and you like you it might be a little bit painful sometimes. Or I guess a better analogy or example would be if you're playing soccer and you've been playing the whole game, you are going to be tired. Like what is the expectation for like, is that something that are you injured or are you hurt? Which is kind of, there's an old movie called The Program, where that's a big line in that movie. Are you hurt or are you injured?
Mm,
Um, and that's kind of like that boundary, I guess they set in that movie. Now, I wouldn't say that movie's a great example of, well, the movie's a great example of trauma, but not like how the appropriate way to handle it. Um, so it is really interesting, especially like in different settings where you kind of have those societal norms also that, here are the expectations. And where do you draw the line between making sure someone is safe and making sure someone is not hurt and or injured, and kind of that sort of you are going to experience discomfort from now on. Whether that is uh like the physical discomfort from playing a whole game and you're tired, or it's the kind of emotional discomfort because maybe in baseball you struck out, or you hit the ball really hard, you thought you were going to get a really good hit, and somebody on the other team made a really, really good play. They're really, really happy. The person who made the hit, they're not excited. They're really, really sad. So like kind of dealing with those types of emotions as well is really, really has been really, really interesting for me, trying to learn along the way. Um, the other character I wanted to talk about in Encanto before we move on, and we won't really talk about Bruno because I know you two talked about Bruno a lot in your episode. People listen to Love's an Open Door and the episode on Encanto for a great discussion of that. One that has been really interesting to me is the character Isabella, because of the way that she, was portrayed as supposed to be this perfect person. And then when she kind of shows that, or I guess when she takes ownership over herself, the symbolism that they use is, like she's growing cactuses, she's growing things with sharp edges and all of that. And I thought that was a really interesting representation of like whatever trauma she is going through, that kind of like belief that you have to be perfect. You are the one in
You
the
have to be
family.
pretty.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
Like,
Like perfect is like such a subjective term, but it means something very specific for her. And very tellingly, the movie doesn't really like explain like why does Isabella have to be perfect? What
mhm,
what are the feared consequences of what happens if she grows a cactus, if she grows a carnivorous plant or a something that's not pastels? Like and I don't think I don't know if it was deliberate that they didn't like define it beyond just perfect, but it almost feels like it was deliberate because it because there's a lot of it, like there's this especially like and we talked about this in the podcast, but like after the what else can I do when she's all covered in
mhm,
the different colors and everything and she looks like it's a like the grandmother can't articulate like why she's doing something bad, like she hasn't hurt anybody, she hasn't done anything wrong, but she's like she's or the grandmother is just like beside herself with anger about it, about like how she's like stepped so far out of line, but she can't articulate like what is actually wrong with what's going on here.
mhm. And I mean, that's kind of like that would be an example of the grandmother trying to confront her trauma, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Right.
she can't voice what she thinks is wrong. She just thinks something is wrong because it doesn't look the way that
Right.
like she grew up.
It's almost like this magical thinking idea where like if everything goes like a certain specific way, then nothing bad will happen. And like change is scary. And the second change starts to happen, she can't say why, but it's obviously that's bad and something bad is going to happen. And that must be like that's the reason she can cling to attribute to why things are falling apart.
Yeah. It also kind of reminds me of the line from one of the songs in Hamilton where the older sister she says she's the prettiest, the wittiest, the like she's the one who's supposed to social climb of the family. Like that was her expectation for the
right.
family.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that story, she like marries someone who is going to give them the family the social standing that they want, even though she, had her romantic relationship with Alexander Hamilton also, which, is just kind of that passing that trauma along, or I guess making that trauma worse for other people in the family as well, because of those actions. So the next one to talk about, because I want to make sure to talk about this one before, in case we run out of time. Um, Ryan's favorite, Lilo and Stitch.
Oh yeah,
What
we
is
Mm-hmm.
the what's the
just talked about
trauma?
that one.
What's the trauma in Lilo and Stitch? And what's the generational trauma in there as well?
I don't know that there is generational
I don't
trauma
think. I
in
mean,
that
it's
one.
yeah. There's the parents are DEA dead. There's no time for like, you know what I mean? Like
And
maybe
it sounds like
maybe for
everything was going
Nani,
fine before. Yeah,
yeah.
but like I
We don't
think
we
like
don't know their
there
backstory.
not enough time has passed. Like I'm sure there probably is going to be, like, especially for Nani, who had to like deal with all that.
Right.
But I think not enough time has passed to say that this is like an example of generational trauma. It's definitely an example of trauma. And I think like it's funny because we talked about how like a lot of this movie was meant to, like, the artistic style especially was meant to like evoke the earlier Disney movies. And we talked about how, like, yeah, there's trauma in the early Disney princess movies, in that like usually a mom is dead, a dad is dead, but like the princesses never really deal with that. But I think one of the earliest examples we see of like a character dealing with some kind of trauma in a Disney movie is Dumbo, which a lot of the
Hmm.
art style in Lilo and Stitch is based on too, where his mom doesn't die, but he's like separated from her, and obviously like has a really huge impact on him, and like kind of he's a pretty passive character, but the few decisions he makes like are influenced by the fact that he's lost his mother, he's been separated from her. Um, but yeah, I just want to mention like these like kind of later stage Disney movies are not the earliest examples of this, but we're definitely getting into like it more and more. But I think Lilo and Stitch is one of the great modern examples of showing like how such an event can like impact a child.
Yeah, and sort of like how Lilo and a child's trauma response to that even is. I mean, like
Mm-hmm.
we talked a lot about this already, but Lilo is like the weird girl in her friend clique. She just doesn't fit in anywhere because I think I said this. I think I said this, Rachel. But as I'm like, well, those kids that she's always having little fights with that are supposedly her friends, they're like super superficial, right? Like they don't. They're just kids. They're
Yeah, I don't know why she
like
wants to be friends with them. Are they like the only other kids on the
I mean, there
island?
doesn't appear to be a lot of people living there, except there's a lot of tourists. But like
Yeah.
what I said is, I'm like, Lilo's already experienced death, and like, what what worse thing is there than death, right? Like, so she's gone full goth girl, where she's like embraced it, and she's like, there's times in it where she's like, just leave me here to die, or like, my friends have been bad, so I'm doing voodoo on them. Like, it's like
Or the
she's
backstory she comes up with for her doll. Like,
or like even the most sad part when like Stitch is leaving with the ugly duckling book
yeah.
and she goes, just go
I
ahead, just leave, everybody else does. Like it is like it is really messed up. And that is sort of like where Cobra Bubbles comes into play, where we're talking such a serious conversation. And then Cobra Bubbles was here.
Cobra Bubbles, best character in the movie, Cobra Bubbles.
Right, who is
I love
also
him.
and it's interesting because Lilo and Stitch and Encanto both do the same thing where you're like, who is the villain going to be? But then it turns out not to be any of them. But these movies are also like 20 years apart, but they're kind of accomplishing the same story when it's like this generational traumas, or not generational. Encanto's more generational trauma, where Lilo and Stitch is just trauma,
Hmm.
like regular trauma. And it, Cobra Bubbles comes in because he's a social security worker and he wants to make sure that Lilo has the best situation for her, and that is something that is like a scary thing for a person that is a caretaker of a child to be facing. But also, this is a highly traumatized child, and they're like, we have to make sure that she's like gonna be okay and not start to harm herself or other people because of what's going on around her. Her best friend is like a destructive little alien that she finds cute. So she's already like expressing like sort of like these things. But there's some things that you love about Lilo too, where she's like this little dark child, but she also finds fat people to be beautiful, and she's taking pictures of them. She's like a collection of them on her wall, and like she sees like inner beauty in what people think is ugly and bad, and like so there's like that response also happening in her. Um, but yeah, it's the Lilo and Stitch is just it's a great film. I cry through it every single time. um, but yeah, I mean, that's just it. So, and you have to look at like Nani's perspective too, as being like the older sister who is now like the parental guardian to her little sister because their parents died in a car crash. And what's interesting about Lilo is that like she hasn't really fully processed everything that's happened, because like she'll talk about what happened to her parents, but she's like, there was a car crash, it was raining, and that's kind of like as far as she's willing to go and talk about
Hmm.
it. So like I don't know, and that is very much a solid trauma movie. of all the Disney films. Like Encanto and Lilo and Stitch is where it's at. But I don't know if I have anything necessarily more to add to that, because I do think that of the two of them, Encanto is the more complex one. That is the more commonplace trauma that you're seeing, which is like this like transgenerational trauma that's going from like each generation to the next one is passing it on. Whereas this is just something that happened to Lilo. So and there's very different kinds of things. But a great example of what I mean when I said I'm like trauma really can be anything. It's like it's not somebody dies. It could be like she's constantly being traumatized. Like these kids are bullying her every day. That's trauma too. You know, like
Yeah.
there's a social worker trying to take her away from her sister. That is also traumatic. You know,
Yeah.
they're out surfing and Stitch accidentally pulls her under because of like everything that's going on. That's a traumatic experience. So, you know, that's just what it is. And it's hard to say that like I'm one of those people that I'm like I don't think there's really such thing as evil, but I do think there is such thing as trauma that makes people do bad things. And so when you look at these like these horrible people in like human history, it's like yeah, there might be some like mental diagnoses that we could go back down and like figure out now. It's like oh, this person was like mentally unstable to begin with, but also like how much trauma did they sustain that they had to get to a place where they were going to become like a warmonger, you know what I mean? So like and that's the kind of thing that you know they look at Lilo and Stitch where they're making sure that she's not going to head down a darker path. So
Yeah,
those are my
and
thoughts.
that I'm glad you said that, Ryan, because that actually that reminds me when you messaged that on the group chat. Uh, I said, "Hey, that's so good. I can your character say it in the book in the Perspectives Files book that I'm constantly working on and never closer to finishing." Um, but because I think that's a really interesting take, and I kind of want to go off script a little bit because um, one of the movies that you two have talked about so far has been um, Beauty and the Beast. And the
It is
really
off
interesting,
script. I wasn't
but
expecting you to say that.
it made me think when you two were talking, it made me think of this because I think it was Rachel who said like, well, and Brian, then you said it also, like they don't really deal with their parents, the loss of their parents. Like in older princess movies, we see like the parent is gone,
Right.
or one parent. When the story begins, there's one or both parents that are gone. Um, and something really interesting with Beauty and the Beast was in the remake, which I know from listening to the episode you two did, the remake is not a favorite. But they added a scene where they take Belle to like the kind of
Oh my god.
a
Wait, did you
scene to
I
explain
know what
more
you're
of the
gonna say.
trauma.
Yeah. Wait, but
So
like
Oh
do
that's the
you
God.
part where
think
Rachel and I were like, does this need to be here though?
I know so but here's the
No,
thing.
it's
Here's
nope.
do you think are they going to do that in the live action Lilo and Stitch because like in
Probably.
that it
I
seemed
think
like they were trying to go back and kind of explain more story.
What
And
was the
is that
most
story
recent one?
needed? And
What
will
was
well,
they do it?
so that kind of like I was thinking when you were when we were talking about like how like Lilo doesn't really want to talk about what happened, and I wondered like how much of that is just like Lilo kind of being a like I don't want to say non-emotional. She's definitely an emotional character, but she doesn't like want to get into those particular emotions, obviously. How much of it is that, and how much of it is this is a movie for 7-year-olds
Mhm.
and we don't want to freak them out too much. So we're just going to allude to what happened and deal with like the fallout of that rather than like the gruesome details of her parents dying in a car crash. So that's a good question. Like I don't know. These movies I don't think there's been a single of these movies that I really really liked. Like Jungle Book was pretty good. But like
Little
um
Mermaid? I really like the Little
I
Mermaid
haven't seen that
remake.
one, but it feels like they always just want to cram things in there that don't need to be there, and they always kind of want to like atone for some perceived sin in the original. And I don't know, like Lilo and Stitch is such a perfect movie. I don't know what I
But
don't know
there,
what
but
there is to fix.
there isn't anything to fix, but they
Um,
certainly add to it because that's what they
yeah,
did with
like what are
Aladdin,
they
where
gonna?
they're like we need to add more to
Well,
the
that one they
story of
tried to make it a
Aladdin, and I
little
was
less
like, or
racist. They tried
Beauty
to
and the
like
Beast,
explain some
yeah,
of the like the plot hole stuff, but there really isn't any plot hole stuff. Like Lilo's like Lilo's is like it depicts a lot of non-white characters, but I don't think I think it's a very sensitive movie. Like I don't know, somebody with more authority, I mean, can speak to that, but I don't know like what's gonna be the thing they feel they have to address.
yeah. I don't
And
know.
that might be it, but I
I
don't know.
I
I don't
worry
know.
more about other things like
It's still
what
they're
are they
still
going to do
aiming for
with
the same
Bleakley in
demographic.
2024? That's what I want to
I
know.
want to know what they're gonna look like.
Yeah, like I'm like, what's that? I'm really concerned about that kind of stuff because there's also like a genuinely canonical queer character in Lilo and Stitch that like quietly flew under the radar for a really long time. So like I'm like, so is that character? And they probably will just like make him gay, like they did in Beauty and the Beast, where they're like, oh, LeFou's
They
gay.
might as well.
But but
If they
that
don't,
right.
somebody's not really thinking this through.
But you can also say that these old movies that they're trying to add all this like this background to in the live action remakes. So like I'm looking at like Little Mermaid or even like Aladdin or something or Beauty and the Beast, where we had those classic villains that were like they are queer coded villains and they're awesome and they're sassy and snarky, but like there's still a lot of trauma that's in those stories and always have been in Disney movies. So like if you look at Little Mermaid, I mean like part of the reason why she gets so obsessed with the upper world is that her dad is like kind of horrible. Like
Mm-hmm.
and when he like destroys all her stuff just for like existing and having interest in things other than what he wanted, he destroys it and she leaves. You know what I mean? Like that's a trauma response. So she's willing to go to a sea witch and basically sell her soul to get away from him is a trauma response. And you'll see that across like any Disney movie. It's like I mean like that's what why trauma is such a broad and very complex subject to look more into. And
So here's a question for you too, because a
yeah,
lot of these movies are, most Disney movies come from other sources. The Little Mermaid came from a different source. Frozen comes from a different, like a lot of these. I think Lilo and Stitch is one of the few that is sort of is more of like an original.
Completely
Yeah.
original. Yeah.
The and I don't know if either of you have kind of gone into the historical like writings of any of these stories, and if you haven't, that's fine. But I wonder if when they were originally written, was that part of like that trauma response? Was part of the original story supposed to be talking about the trauma and like the
Some of
response to
them,
that? Do either of you know?
some of them, like probably. I think like with Beauty and the Beast, I think a lot of people don't realize like it's based on a story that the main like moral of the story was was for young girls to learn like yeah you might have to marry some guy who's ugly and mean to you but it's fine, you can learn to love him. But I think like a lot of the like the Grimm fairy tales kind of those older stories that like the Grimms, the Brothers Grimm, like I don't think they wrote those stories, they kind of just collected them from around Europe, and so that's why there's like so many different versions of them. But like I think a lot of it was written as these like cautionary tales, like Little Red Riding Hood. Like Disney hasn't done a Little Red Riding Hood movie, but Little Red Riding Hood is very clearly
wow, how
based
have they
on,
missed that one? Now that you said
well,
that,
it's so short, but like I don't know. I because like Hans Christian Andersen wrote The Little Mermaid and The Snow Queen.
I mean, all these were short
Uh,
stories, so like
Yeah,
that's my
and
argument.
I don't know like that there's a lot of yeah, I don't know. I think like there are a lot of fairy tales in general that some of which have been covered by Disney and some not, that are more based on like warnings to young children of
Mhm.
the bad things that could happen if you step out of line. And some of those are based in real threats. And some of those are based in more like purity culture and like or like fear of foreigners and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is the cautionary tale from the original Cinderella story? Is the cautionary tale for the stepsisters? Because like
Uh
that story ends very, very badly.
Cinderella
or the
has
two
oh
stepsisters?
well, Cinderella has so many different versions of it. I don't know. I think like yeah, like the idea is just to kind of be patient and kind and good things will happen to you. And the sisters are vain and selfish, and that's why they get their eyes pecked out by birds. Spoiler
In
alert
the
for the
books, I know.
in the Perrault version. There's like a Brothers Grimm version and there's a Charles Perrault version. And I think the Charles Perrault version is the one where they get their eyes pecked out.
Yeah.
Don't quote
I
me
mean,
on
isn't
that.
the Brothers
But
Grimm version they like get rolled down a hill in like a barrel or something?
it's
Like
like
there's one version where it's like it's very, very gruesome. I eyes pecked out by crows is probably more gruesome, but
yeah, I definitely think a lot of fairy tales in general are like based on these like perceived or real threats that we're trying to like warn the younger generation away from.
okay.
And we still
Um,
see this played out in a lot of modern storytelling as well, like just in different ways.
so you touched on Frozen and we touched on Strange World a little bit, where like the in Frozen it's the loss of parents, it's the kind of the overprotection of an older sister to basically like keep herself away from her younger sister because she's hurting her younger sister, but also like what she's dealing with, like she's she if she unleashes her power she would be hurting other people. Strange World is kind of what we do to ourselves, what we do to our family, but also what we do just to the environment as well. One that's really, really interesting to me that I added later was WandaVision.
Yeah.
Because I really, really enjoyed the way that's a weird way to say that. Enjoy, you shouldn't.
No,
Um,
you're allowed to
but
enjoy how a story is
It's a
told.
good show.
it's
I've been thinking about rewatching it actually.
Yeah, you
it's
got
a
to catch it right
great.
before Agatha All On. That's coming up.
Yeah,
Oh
that
yeah.
it comes out next Wednesday as
Yeah, I'm
recording.
excited. Woo!
Um, the I like the way that they showed how she dealt with things. Which is, like the complete opposite way of how you probably should deal with it, especially if you have superpowers. Um, what are some of the kind of the lessons from WandaVision? Because that's one of the few, like that's, it was live action, it wasn't animated, it was from Marvel, not from like Disney
It was
proper,
the
if you will.
yeah, it
It
was
was also a show that really helped start this conversation on a broader scale because I remember when WandaVision came out, a lot of people were talking about like, has trauma been perceived in this way in a show or even a superhero show? I had people messaging me being like, is this something that typically happens in the comics? Is like there's all this trauma talk. Like it was the first time I'd really seen even for a Disney property where they've kind of touched on this before, where they were like this is a show entirely dedicated to somebody's traumatic response to something.
but you know what I love about that is that when the show was coming out, like they were doing one episode a week, and every week I would go on YouTube and watch like the theory videos of
I know, it was
here's
so
what's
good.
really happening.
We were doing that
And
on the Mutant Ages too. It
and
was
some
like
people were like,
crazy.
maybe it's just Wanda doing all this, and everyone was like, no, it can't just be Wanda because she's a good person, so it's got to be Mephisto, it's got to be like
Oh my god, the
like
Mephisto
all these
conversations.
oh my god, like all of these different like anything it like the theories were all literally anything except Wanda did this because Wanda went through the trauma of seeing her lover
Mhm.
die
It was a lot
twice,
of
right?
different things, and she
Twice.
lost her
And like
her
all this,
brother, her
yeah,
twin
she lost
brother.
her brother, but like that was like all of these things that like just kind of broke her little by little by little, like throughout her entire life. And nobody considered like it could just be Wanda because because
Well,
what was happening
I
was
think long term comic book fans were like,
yeah,
"Oh, it's definitely
right.
Wanda."
But
We know because people were like coming up. There's like, "What do you think it is?" And like, I remember Maddie and I being like, "It's Wanda. Like, this is what she does in the comic book. So she
like
does
even like I
breakdowns
would see
and
like
changes reality." Like,
I would see like videos that would acknowledge like yeah she's done this in the comics but here's why it's not her this time
Mhm.
and like all this stuff and it was and like looking back on it it makes me laugh so hard because we like just to think about how simple the explanation ended up being, and how like yes, she did this thing that's pretty dark and a little like retrospectively like, pretty evil, like mind controlling a whole town and like in a
And
really
hurting them
creepy
when she
way and
was like
hurting
freaking
them.
out. Yeah, like
Um,
that was a whole
like,
thing.
but uh, like, sorry, the bell rang outside and I lost my train of thought. But it just like I guess what I'm saying is like I love how we were having all these speculations and the answer ended up being so simple and like horrifying, but also so beautifully written in the way they and shown in the way they like showed how like the town was created, how vision was recreated. Um, but yeah, I think it's really interesting how every week we were speculating on this and it just quote unquote turned out to be trauma.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it's still one of it's still probably the most well received Disney Plus show from
Yeah.
Marvel. Um, Loki touches on like his trauma as well. That was another show that was very well
At
received.
least in the first season. I don't know
And
what
yeah,
happened
the
in the
first
second
season.
season.
Um,
Very different tone.
the another show that I really liked, like my top three Marvel shows on Disney Plus, in no particular order, but are WandaVision, Loki. I like season one and season two of Loki, so I just kind of count them together. But then Moon Knight as well, because Moon Knight deals with
Oh, right. Moon Knight
a
was
lot of,
like,
that deals with his trauma. And here's where I'm getting with this. Like the Ryan, you originally said Disney doesn't really have a traditional villain anymore. Trauma is the villain.
mm,
And then you also, about 20 minutes ago now, said like you have a belief that maybe there aren't evil people in the world. It's people's trauma and depending on how they deal with it, that
right.
kind of causes them to do these things. Where we are in society right now, do we, um, our stories dealing with trauma, like trauma is the villain, is that more entertaining and kind of prescient right now in our society versus like the traditional villain, kind of like in the last Puss in Boots movie, where like that did have a traditional villain who was chasing
Oh
him
my God, that was
around
so
the
good.
whole movie.
This is
So
a
what do you,
Disney podcast, but yes, that was like a return to form on like what a villain is.
yeah.
Well, I was gonna say like all the movies that we've discussed are way more entertaining than the last Disney movie to have a villain, which is Wish.
Okay, but
But
Cody likes Wish, so we can't rag on his show
I'm
on
I'm
it.
not gonna
Actually,
I'm not gonna
I
rag
have a
on anybody.
question on that one next. So, but let's
Okay.
finish this because I do have a
But
question on that one.
um I mean, I think if you can tell a good story, like it doesn't really matter who the antagonist, who or what the antagonist is. I think Disney has kind of figured out that they don't need to follow a traditional formula. They figured that out a while ago, but they still seem to kind of want to crawl back to it every once in a while to mixed kind of results. But they've figured out that there's a lot to mine, and I think when you look at every story like it is almost kind of like when you think back to a lot of stories. I'm thinking of like modern kind of media, uh and I don't watch a lot of TV, but there's like a couple of shows that I've watched recently, Interview with the Vampire, Time Bandits. Like there's always some kind of trauma response in some way, like how a character, but I think that also what that comes back to, and I'm kind of babbling here, but is that a character's past should necessarily affect their uh their actions in the present of the story. And that doesn't mean that they have to have like this horrific backstory, but if their backstory is just everything always went great for me, then you end up with a fairly passive character who doesn't have a lot of motivation. And I think like when you do have a character with a fairly passive, happy backstory, you have to kind of manufacture other ways to get them
Yeah.
to move along the story. Like you have to pull the rug out from under them in some way. I think like Wish is a good example of that, of a character who's like everything's great, and then everything kind of gets ripped out from under her. Um, so I don't know if like I would kind of assign one type of story to be more entertaining than the other. I think it's all who's running the ship and what can they do with the materials that are handed to them.
Um, it, two to connect two movies with what you just said, like how a person's past should influence what they're doing in the future, and like it's not as well, it's more difficult to tell a story if somebody is like they've had this perfect past without much explanation. One of the one of the few kind of criticisms I have heard of Deadpool and Wolverine is the lack of discussion of like Cassandra Nova's past. And they even kind of allude to that in the movie where somebody asks, "Why are you like this?" And
She
she
says,
just
"I
says,
wish
"I
I
wish I
knew."
knew." Like, and to me, like that kind of ties in with, yes, the with Wish. I did enjoy that movie. I would have enjoyed that movie more if we actually would have learned what was causing Magnifico to behave the way that he
Like, where
did.
did they come from? You know,
Yeah,
Right,
like
they
right.
don't get into any of that.
is
But
it
but
his fear of
yeah.
losing the power, kind of like it was like the grandmother and Encanto? Like that would have been a much more like
Or
kind
was
of
it he
rounded
wanted to be
character to
more
me.
pretty, like the snow queen, the evil queen in Snow White? Like,
Yeah.
who knows? Like, what was his end goal there? We'll never know. That movie suffers a lot of storytelling problems.
Yeah.
It's
But
fun to watch, but
I
you
think in
know,
this the case of Cassandra Nova, like nothing against Chris Pine, he is a great actor, but he was not given a lot of material to work with. Like his character was very one dimensional. And you're right, did not have a lot of backstory. Like Emma Corrin, they they had a lot better material to work with, I think. And
guys, Cassandra Nova in that movie is a real sore spot for me. So
yeah,
like,
but I loved
it
I
is.
loved I loved I loved their performance. Like just
Oh,
and
I
the way that
agree.
the way that the fingers were animated and all that. Oh, it's so creepy and cool. So
Oh
that like
yeah.
to me kind of made up for it. But also like I don't go to a Deadpool movie for the villain. I go
Yeah.
to a Deadpool
Right.
movie for Deadpool. But a Disney movie that promises to be like a return to form better have a good villain.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think that's a fair point because I mean, like Emma Corrin, fantastic as Cassandra Nova, but like I don't like that. Like it made no sense for that character to be there because she is Cassandra Nova is one of the more terrifying villains in the Marvel universe because she is overpowered and she is totally okay with genocide. Like she just is like, and it's
Prefers
be
it actually,
right. And
probably.
so in the Deadpool and Wolverine movie, you know, they did kind of tap into a little bit where they're like, oh, she's the twin sister of Xavier, who like, and Xavier tried to kill her in the womb. And like, that's like a whole thing that happened. And she's coming back because of all the trauma that Xavier caused her. And now she wants to kill all mutants because of him is like a really important story that just got lost in this movie somewhere. And I'm like, kind of a waste and kind of a waste of that of Emma, who did a fantastic job at that role. Um, but like if you wanted to get into the real trauma of that story, they just didn't do it. And like, you know, the thing is that we talk about this on the Mutant Ages, and I'm not going to spiral too much about this, but in the Mutant Ages, we talk a lot about how Professor Xavier, is like really a terrible person who's constantly traumatizing his students and also Magneto and pretty much anyone he comes into interactions with. He's not a good person. And sort of like there's scenes in X-Men comics where like Cassandra Nova will like sort of have like a traumatic response or memory to something that Xavier did to her. Juggernaut's another character because that's his other brother who has all this trauma from their parents and Xavier himself. And all that has been lost in the movies. And I think that is like a total tragedy that they had Cassandra Nova in there and they didn't touch into that. So when you brought up her trauma, I was like, I'm like, her trauma? That wasn't even in Deadpool, right?
Yeah.
Like, so and that is something that I run into a lot with like comic book to Disney movies is that I'm like, it's fine. You can change things. I don't expect see some things to be the same, but like, I think there's some key factors that you don't want to mess around with, and that they just kind of did that, and it was very frustrating for me.
Right.
But
And you could say like, well, they could just use her again in another movie, but realistically, the way things are going with Marvel, they probably won't.
I don't. I can't even deal with what's going on over in the MCU right now. They got to straighten themselves out. But Agatha all along looks great. So
I'm sure that will be great, actually.
Well,
yeah,
and do you think so? Here's a question. Do you think Ryan, because I know this is a sour note for you or a spot
I
for
mean, I
you.
still enjoyed it. Don't get
Um
me wrong. Like,
no, but
but
I'm talking about with Xavier. Do
what
you
about him?
think they will when the X-Men, when Professor X properly enters the MCU? Do you think it will be just the story of kind of what every probably what 90 85 90% of comic book readers or just kind of casual fans of have seen the movies think of Professor X? Like he is this like kind of upstanding person who is very positive. He makes some questionable decisions sometimes, but his goals are, you know, honorary or honorable, sorry. Um, or
Are
are they
they
going to tell the
are they
story of
self-serving for
like,
him?
yeah, like are they going to tell that story?
I'm
Because
gonna
that
take
is
a
a
minute.
very interesting story.
I'm gonna take a
Sure.
minute to go grab my charger because
Okay.
I can't talk about I don't know anything about Marvel.
That's fine. We'll keep it short. I was going to say that Professor Xavier, at least in the movies, has been played by some really incredible actors, including Patrick Stewart and oh my god, James McAvoy. I said Mark McAvoy, and that was not correct. Um, and it's hard to look at somebody like Patrick Stewart and see him playing like this character in like a mean way. And they kind of got to do that a little bit in X3, but genuinely, like it's just like Patrick Stewart's just too nice. But James McAvoy, for what it's worth, when we were watching those movies on the Mutant Ages, I kept on being like, he gets Xavier. He gets that Xavier is a complicated, layered person who wants to do the right thing, but can't get past his own like self-serving ways and what he wants. And he'll manipulate other people to get there and essentially traumatize them to do that. I don't know if you watched the new X-Men 97, Cody, that's on
Mhm.
Disney Plus, but I do know that, but I don't know how far he got into it. Is that like in the final episode, they have Charles Xavier going into
Yeah.
Magneto's history of him and the and World War II and surviving all of that, which is something that he traditionally has done in all the shows, where he like will use Magneto's trauma against him and make him relive the Holocaust, which is like what good person would do that to a person? And in X-Men 97, they basically have Xavier completely brainwash him. And then once he starts remembering his trauma, Xavier's like, I'm here for you to help you through this, which is like just a crazy manipulative thing, because what he's trying to accomplish in that moment is Xavier's trying to like take control of Magneto's powers. Um, but like that is all like, I mean, like that's all like very traumatic for the person. And you have to think about like how did Charles Xavier get to that space? Like, and I don't think that the comic books or the movies have really explored that enough, because he's like a rich handicapped kid, and like that, or no, he wasn't even handicapped at the time. It was just like they did a little backstory on the animated series where they were like, his parents or his somebody, I think it was his father, died and then was replaced by like a really horrible stepfather that like was awful to both him and Kane. And I think that is like what they ultimately ended up going with for his backstory. So that is a traumatic response, but like psychologically now Xavier tries to control people because he was trying to be controlled by his stepfather, if that makes any sense. So, but we don't need to talk about X-Men because I have a whole other podcast for that. Like that's not what we're here for. You just opened up the door with Cassandra Nova, and they're asking me about Charles Xavier. Yeah, I would actually like to see more trauma be portrayed in the MCU beyond WandaVision, because or Moon Knight, because that's primarily where I've seen a lot of that happen at this point. And I saw that on your list. You also you expanded into like the MCU stuff, and you also expanded into the Star Wars stuff. And me here being like, like I grew up loving Star Wars. I watched the original trilogy and the Ewok movies more times than anybody could count. And then I like kind of got into like the first three movies, but now I'm in a place of my life where I'm trying to like catch up in the Star Wars franchise, which because now there's a ton of it. And I was kind of curious what you wanted to talk about in relation to that, or if there was like a point that you were thinking about with that.
Well, it was really, I mean, it made me think of it because as we record, it was yesterday. James L. Jones passed away, who
Right.
is the iconic voice of Darth Vader. It was also the voice of Mufasa in The Lion King. And so it just made me think
Talk
about
about trauma. The Lion King.
those movies. Well,
The Lion King traumatized children.
and that's more than Star Wars, really. It's The Lion King because that's the story of um Hamlet. That
Yeah.
like how somebody deals with the loss of a parent, how somebody deals with kind of the uh betrayal of like a kind of extended family member. And so real quickly, like kind of what are the lessons that somebody can take from the Lion King movies? Both, I mean, animated, there's the live action remake, which is pretty close to the animated one. What lessons about trauma could someone take from that?
Oh, a Lion King is like so clear cut. I mean, like it, the whole thing that the Lion King does is it's like he runs away from the trauma. What you've got to do is you can't run away from it. You have to face it and you have to embrace it. That's the whole thing. And it's he meets Timon and Pumbaa out in like the oasis, right? And those are two other characters that have been ostracized from whatever they came from, and they have all this previous trauma. And they're like, well, now we just like we get stoned in the woods, like that's what we do, and we eat bugs. And Simba grows up hanging out with them until Nala comes back, and she's like, "What is going on here?" Not she's like she's found him. She's like the whole kingdom has fallen apart because you like ran away, and the three of you are just sitting here like doing nothing. And they're like, "Oh, we're just enjoying
They're
life."
they're so
So
stoned they don't realize like 5 years have passed too. They're like,
I mean,
I'm
they spent a
fine.
lot of time looking at the stars. So
Well, in their defense, I mean, it literally was like a 2 second or a 2 minute montage where they
yeah,
like
Growing up, yeah.
where he grew up. So
Um, it, so yeah, Lion King's one I kind of struggle with as an adult because yeah, like I agree. There's definitely the movie is definitely promoting this idea of like you have to keep going, you have to face your past. But the thing is like
there's also Scar
in the
just
yeah
orchestrating all
within
this.
the yeah within the text of the movie, there are very real
mhm.
physical like dangers to for him to face his trauma. He doesn't really have like a licensed therapist to talk to about this. He has a monkey who whacks him with a stick sometimes, and
And like some sort of
like
like
and
hallucinogenic
and
like
right,
like
bugs that he eats. I don't know.
I no, I don't know.
Um,
And then he's talking to his dad in the cloud,
yeah,
you know.
I think that it's a very like the yeah Rafiki like pretty much states it like it's in the past or you have to go like he lives you blah 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 all these like very explicit like
They wrote
statements
a
of
whole
what the
song
moral is of
about
the
it in
movie.
like
Yeah,
the
the
sequel.
sequel. But I think that the truth is a lot more nuanced than that, and I think that's what kind of more the recent movies are trying to get into is like it's not just do one thing and it will fix everything. It's he something really horrible happened to him and he was too young to process it and he believed the closest authority figure who told him he was responsible and that he should run away.
Was manipulating
um
him. Yeah.
right, but like in real life there should be like when a child goes through trauma like that, and like I'm speaking as somebody who I had a sibling growing up who was in and out of the hospital. She's doing great now, but there was a time when my parents weren't sure she was gonna like live to be 10 years old. And the impact that had on me is that I went to a lot of therapy, but there I also like the therapy wasn't just like sit down and talk about how sad you are that your sister might die. A lot of it was playing. A lot of it was
Mhm.
like doing puzzles and like trying to like help me process like this through kind of clearing my head through these like more, like distractions and stuff. So there was like this equal balance of like facing reality in an age appropriate way, but also giving me space to be a child. And The Lion King obviously is like it's about animals in Africa. It's a very like harsh environment. But I think it's difficult for me both as a parent, as an adult, as like somebody who went through something like traumatic as a child, and went to therapy for it. And I got off pretty lucky, all things considered. But it's just hard for me to say like, yeah, that Lion King like has a good lesson for the children. Like it has a good lesson for Simba. But
I mean, if anything, like the children are also traumatized alongside Simba
right,
because
the movie
this is the
itself is a
movie that you
traumatic
still
event.
right. I was gonna say, how many memes have you seen in the past 20 years where it's like that moment when like Simba goes up to Mufasa and he's dead, and
His
they're
body and he
like,
puts his head on
yeah,
his
and then
paw.
he's like,
Yeah.
wake up, dad, like, and like how people are still like messed up like this. It's like that movie in Fox and the Hound, which I still can't watch Fox and the Hound. I tried
Yeah.
watching like one of the scenes from it that got me upset as a child, and I was like, it's been 35 years. I think I can manage this here this now. It's like a few years ago. I watched like 2 seconds of it, and I was like, nope.
Yeah.
So
You, so one company, the last thing before we do our rapid questions, one Pixar has told a lot of stories recently that deal with trauma and kind of the way people respond to trauma. And I'm talking about from Luca and um, Turning Red and Elemental
Oh,
and
Turning Red's
even
a
like
great
their
generational trauma example, actually. I didn't know why we didn't think
yeah,
about that, but that's a really good one.
their short stories like Far From Tree and Out and Fly, like the different way, especially what was so interesting with Pixar is when they were doing their project. I can't remember the program it was called, where basically they were doing like more experimental, or they were allowing people to sort of direct their own short stories, which is where we got Fly and where we got Out from. Um, they've done how do you think they've done as far as telling these types of stories in a way that like we as consumers can understand them and the way that these characters deal with their trauma?
Rachel, what's your thought?
I, of those examples, I've seen Luca, I've seen Turning Red. I think Turning Red like is another good one where like in Kanto the manifestation of the generational trauma is very literal. Like it's the all the pandas are literally like manifestations of this trauma that happened to this family. Uh Turning Red, I think, is probably the best example. Luca to me, the is a little thinner. It's very Studio Ghibli-esque in like not thinner but more abstract, I would say.
I mean,
Uh
what's the name of Luca's friend that he's in love with?
Alberto.
Like, Alberto,
Al
he's
yeah. Oh
holding a
yeah,
lot of
he
trauma
does.
too.
He
Mhm.
But
does. But
it's
I
been
don't
so
think the
long
movie
since I've seen
explores
it.
it. I don't think the movie explores it. It's almost a very like uh a less like intense it's like kind of a reverse, no, it's not reverse, it's like a Little Mermaid type of story where like his parents don't want him going because like the
Well,
danger
his
of
parents were going to send him
humans.
away to like conversion camp. That was like a whole thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I don't feel it's been a long time since I've seen Luca, but I did like Luca definitely stands out in my memory as more of like a vibes movie, as more of like a like yeah, there's definitely a story and there's definitely problems and conflict that the characters have to deal with, but like I think like what people tend to remember, what I tend to remember anyway, is more of like the aesthetics of it. But I think it's a really good movie. I can't speak to it as well because Turning Red really like I've only seen both of those movies once, and Turning Red like sticks out way more in my
Mhm.
mind because am I think I'm probably the same age as the person who made the movie and like the time period that it's set in. So
and see, it's
uh
reversed for me, although I think they're both great movies. But that's because I
yeah,
watched Luca and I was like, this is like the queerest thing I've ever seen. And I was having
yeah,
like a reaction to that. And so, like, there's parts of that movie that I remember very specifically as being like highly emotional for me. Whereas
right,
Turning Red, there was that intergenerational trauma, but there's a lot of it that was hard for me to relate to. One, as a
right.
man,
Right.
like, so like,
And I'm not like I'm not Asian, and I also don't come from a family where like
yeah,
menstruation was a shameful thing.
right.
Uh but I do remember like just the hormones and the like the craziness of it and how I like feeling like you're a different person in your body than you were the day before. So like, yeah, I definitely feel on a personal level I related to that more, but I loved both of the movies.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've seen most of the other examples you mentioned. I've kind of fallen off the Pixar wagon the past few
Well,
years.
what's the name of that movie? The Far from the Tree, is that what it's
Far from
called?
Tree. Yeah.
Far from Tree. I think I'll keep this short. I think of all the Disney things out there or Disney media out there that you can consume when you're looking for sort of like the generational trauma specifically, like not just trauma in general. Like if you're looking for a specific example, obviously Encanto exists, and I think that's a great example. But if you want it wrapped up in 5 minutes for you, that movie does it. Because, or sorry, that short does it because it's about these two raccoons. Like there's the parent and then there's the kid, and the kid's just running around on the beach trying to play with like whatever, and then a wolf comes, and the wolf comes and tries to attack them. The parent grabs the kid, they run up into a tree, and then the parent like screams and flips out at this child and shows them like, I have a scar on my eye from the wolves attacked me as a child. Like these things will kill you. You need to be smarter. You're being stupid. It's going to hurt you. It's going to haunt you forever. Blah, blah, blah. And then it jumps forward in time, and that kid is now an adult with their kid. And the same situation happens again. They get up in the tree, and like you see the panic and anger coming over the parent, and like you see the kid looking in terror like he did, and then it stops, and he sits down and he goes, he calms his emotions, and he's like, okay, this happened to me as a kid. You have to be really careful, and here's why. It's like, and that is a great example of breaking the generational trauma. I just want to talk about it. Rachel still hasn't seen it. It's very good. I think it's
I'll
one of
watch
the
it.
best examples out there to really show what that is like. I'm trying to think if there's a short that is just like about trauma directly. I don't know if there is. There probably is. If I will record this, and then like in 2 weeks from now I'll message Cody and be like, why didn't we talk about this thing? Which is generally how I do most things. But like that's where I stand on that, and I think that is a great representation of that. I don't know if there's anything besides Turning Red where you see like that physical trauma. Like, I mean, you do see that in Far From Tree because there's like scarring on them, so that's physical. Like, you know, um, but I don't know. Speaking of scarring, Scar and Lion King, what they're
I
gonna do in this Mufasa movie? That's like
well, and
so bizarre.
that's the thing. Watch, I would I'm
They keep
interested to
changing where his
see.
scar came from. I'm like, just pick one. It's like it's not that hard, guys.
I'm
So
interested to see what that movie is and kind of like how they, as one of you said, try to like right the wrongs or like atone for sins of previous movies. Like,
Hmm.
what are they going to do in that to try to
yeah.
give more backstory to all of this? So we have some rapid questions. Before we do that, and we have about 10 minutes. Is there anything else you think is important to say about the way Disney portrays trauma?
Um, anything about the way Disney portrays trauma? I actually, the only thing I think that Disney could do a little bit better is like the healing process, because all these movies end with like the trauma, trauma, trauma. You look at Encanto, and then at the end, it's like she realizes that she's wrong, and she's talked to Mirabelle, and they go back to house, and everything's better now. Even
Hmm.
even Bruno's back, and everyone's like figured out all their stuff. I was like, okay, that is not how that works at all. Like
Right.
there's time
There's
and
a lot of work to
communication and
Yeah.
do.
healing. Like, do you think that these people aren't going to harbor bad feelings for their grandmother and their mother for like many years to come? No, that's what therapy is for. And you don't see any of that. Little Mermaid does it too. It's like all this stuff between Ariel and King Triton goes on for the whole thing, or then Ursula and King Triton and whatever happened between them, which they kind of touched on in the movie, the remake, the live action one. And you like, again, we don't like, it's just like at the end, it's like, oh yeah, it's all in the bridge. I got my man, and like my dad's making a rainbow for me. It's like, well, no, you don't. Like, it doesn't resolve like that. Like, it takes
Yeah.
time, and like, as somebody who has had to do a lot of therapy and work on dealing with his own traumas, because I've had some pretty crazy stuff happen to me over the years, and we don't need to go. You can go listen to Mutant Ages about that. I've talked about that pretty openly there. I've been doing that for 7 years, so like you can listen to there. But what I've had to learn is that like there's a lot that goes into it. Like they kind of did it in Encanto a little bit, where it's like, okay, you admit that trauma is there, but you lean into it, you like really lean into those horrible feelings, and you have to accept that they're there and deal with that and feel everything that it brings up. And so you can like sort of figure out like the responses it's causing to your body. You have to see what's happening to you emotionally and mentally, but also there's all these physical responses and like what you're putting out to the people around you. And that's the stuff that you have to really sit with. And that's so hard to do. And you have to like smile while doing it so you can like embrace that it's there so you can let it go. That doesn't happen in any Disney movie or MCU
Yeah.
movie. It's like the trauma is there and it's like boom. Or like Wanda's case, she didn't even resolve it at all. She just went crazy and tried to kill everybody, like in
Well,
Doctor Strange, right? Like,
yeah, and that's one thing I was going to say is like but all of the progress that seemingly was made at the end of WandaVision was kind of in a way reversed in Doctor Strange and
well,
Multiverse of
there was
And
a
I know those
production
movies
problem
were
with it.
being yeah, those movies
Like,
were being made at essentially the same time. Like they didn't
but like
really
in reverse a little bit,
yeah,
like yeah, and then
yeah,
they're like then going back and shooting WandaVision, and like Elizabeth Olsen is like, wait, what are we doing? Like,
yeah.
but that's a production problem, and that's something that's very unique to the MCU is that there's nothing else that's ever existed like the MCU, where you have like movies and TV shows that have been tying into each other for like 20 years. There's like another 20 years planned because it's like the comic books. You never know who's going to pack. You never know if they're going to take Iron Man and make him play Doctor Doom. You never know.
No, they would
So,
never do that. It's never gonna happen. All
but
right,
like, yeah.
so here's five rapid questions. These are things that again you can explain. You don't have to explain if you don't want. Um, and it actually interestingly, Ryan, you did mention one of them, although I never asked you, but you mentioned one of these. Um, Rachel, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite Disney movie? And that could be Disney proper, it could be acquired, anything.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that tends to change a lot, but I would say like The Emperor's New Groove is one that I never really get sick of watching. So
Okay.
it's probably that or Muppet Treasure Island.
Okay. Ryan?
Oh yeah. Can your students and listeners guess at this point? Should we do like a Jeopardy theme while they're thinking about it, challenging their memories? Um, because it's Goofy Movie and Lilo and Stitch, all the way, all the way.
Uh, So, do you have a favorite Disney lesson or one that has stood out to you? So, I guess you could think of it as storyline or just lesson within a movie.
Lesson within a movie from Disney. See, I needed to prepare for this.
Yeah.
I'm like quickly Googling. I'm like, what are all the Disney movies ever?
Well,
Because
is there something that has stood out to you? Like
yeah, I mean, okay, so something that comes to mind right away is that we might have talked about this, Cody. I don't remember if it was like on an episode or if it was just in casual conversation, but like the thing is that one of the things I love about Moana is that Moana is consistently being told by her generational family, like it's like we can never leave the island. This is it. And Moana is like, we need to leave if we want to survive. And also like, why aren't we doing that? For to only discover their ancestors were explorers and they were going to different islands. And she goes through this whole thing where she saves her island and then has to like basically be like, you're not gonna get anywhere by never changing and just doing the same things over and over. And you're just going to die if you see all your crops dying and you just decide, well, there's nothing we can do. Like, Moana's whole thing is that like I love Moana because it's so good at telling a story that's not a princess story that like involves a love interest, or it's just like literally her challenging everything that's being given to her, and she's doing what she thinks is best for her people that doesn't hurt anyone, and then she like gets out there and she's like, we have to grow. That is the big life lesson
Mhm.
at the end of Moana. It's like we have
mhm.
to grow. We have to keep moving forward to like grow and expand and like learn more about ourselves and how to operate in the world and evolve. And like, like if you sit here and you never change, like, like you're never gonna actually get anywhere. And that's the great thing about Moana is like she like basically proves that she's right. you
Okay.
know You can't,
Um,
but the thing with like other Disney films is like it doesn't really fit like that. So you look at like Cinderella, it's like okay, it's like if I'm really plain and simple and do all the rules, then the prince is gonna choose me over my evil stepsisters. Like that's a really weird lesson.
yeah.
Like so,
Um, I think like a lesson that stands out to me is also from Moana, and this was something like this is not of my own mind. This is something that was pointed out to me in a YouTube video I watched. But like the idea that like a lot of Disney movies have this like chosen one narrative and this like
yeah,
idea that you're the only one who could solve this problem. And one thing that really stands out, and part of it is like I watched Moana shortly after my grandfather died, and like that was like a big impact on me. But the scene where towards the end of the movie where after she's been told like you're the only one who you it's your job, you have to go return this heart to Tafiti, you have to save the world. Her grandmother admits that she was wrong and that she shouldn't have put all that pressure on her. And I think like as a society, a lot of us are unlearning this kind of grind mentality where all the pressure is on us. We are solely responsible for not only our successes and failures, but our family's successes and failures, our society's successes and failures. And it is not, you know, it's not our job individually. We
Yeah.
we are allowed to say no to things like that.
Okay.
yeah,
Um,
that's great. I like that.
the next two actually I will save for another time because I have to do with our um
Okay.
long awaited Disney movie discussion.
Okay.
So the last one
What?
is this comes from I did an interview with Emily McDermott, and we were talking about her Book of the Mouse Club. But I also learned that she was a cast member, and was a friend of the characters. She like got to play the characters in the parks. And so through that conversation, it got me interested in looking at what character, if I was a character in a park or could be a friend of a character, that's the official way to talk about it. What characters could I be friends with? And
Right.
they're like there are height charts and everything.
Ignore
So
those, I assume, for this question. Because I wouldn't be
so
anybody. I'm too short.
so I have the list pulled up. So
Okay.
what,
Um,
Rachel,
I would
what is your height range?
I'm
What?
5'1". I'm very
Okay.
short.
What?
So
So
What? I'm so confused, but just keep going.
so between
I really have to go in a couple minutes though. Um,
between at 5'1",
yeah,
and
I
they
could play.
list Max,
Yeah.
White Rabbit, Pooh, Robin Hood, Timon, Bashful, and the rest
Oh,
of the dwarves.
you did show this to
Of
me. I just
those,
remember this.
what character would you think you would like to play the
Oh,
most?
of those.
Where's the chart? Can you send it to me?
Uh, okay. So I could play one of the seven dwarves.
Yeah.
Okay, Grumpy all the way. He's so
Okay.
fun. He's so fun. Yeah.
All right, and then Rachel, go ahead. I know you have a 4 o'clock stop. So I'll ask Ryan this last
Okay.
one. But thanks for joining us, Rachel.
Oh, of course. Thank you for having me. Uh, yeah. I will let you guys go then.
Okay. We'll talk to you
Okay.
later.
You can stay, Rachel, if you want. You're
I
allowed.
No, I can't. I have to go pick up April from school.
She's gonna be sitting there tapping her foot, being like, "Where are you, mom? 1 minute late."
No, they'll charge me a lot of money if I don't pick her up.
Yeah,
That's why I
I
have to
know how
go.
that works. You got to get there quick. So,
All right. Bye guys,
so
Ryan. We'll talk
bye.
soon.
Yeah,
Bye.
we will. Bye.
Bye.
All right. So I put it in the chat.
Yeah, I did. I did. This is interesting because I thought I would be able to fit Goofy, but I think I can't because there's two different
So
sizing things.
what is your height?
I'm 5'11",
Yeah.
but my friend who works for Disney and she works in the costuming department, designing costumes, was like, "Oh, what's your height?" And I told her, she's like, "Oh, you'd probably be able." She's like, you would be Goofy." Is what she would told me, and that's who I'd want to be. But if we looked strictly at this list, that's like 5'11" to 6 foot, because it doesn't say like who's who, in the 6 foot to 6'11" to 6'2". I think obviously Goofy. I would probably just go with Tigger so I could like do something with all the energy that I have.
And there's also because that's the range I'm in. I think another one that would be cool, like Goofy would be fun because he's like the, part of the Sensational Six.
Right.
Um, I think it would be cool to do Launchpad also. Because I remember seeing Launchpad. We took a picture with Launchpad at um, Animal Kingdom. Actually,
Right.
right outside of Dino Land, which will, I wonder if he'll stay in there.
Oh
Because,
wait, I could be Captain Hook. I didn't even see that.
yeah, it's, and I'm trying to, Captain Hook is not a face character, are they?
No,
Do
it's
do
very
they have a hood?
weird.
They have a head, right?
Yeah, him and there's a weird amount of them that do. It's like Captain Hook, Hades, um, who's the other one that's like a really weird one that I was like, I don't understand why that this isn't Jafar. The three of them all I find it very weird. I'm like, just have people play these roles. Like, we
Well,
don't
and
need them in masking costumes.
I
So
wonder if like because they have so like the way that they're drawn, they have so like
I
recognizable,
well,
pronounced feature. Like Hades is very like the bottom
yeah,
of his
I
face is really
guess.
pointy and
But
every,
I'm going to argue right now what they've been doing over at Disneyland for Oogie Boogie's Bash and having all these people play these characters. It
Yeah.
looks really good. They have a really good looking Hades there who does not have like they. I think they added like a chin prosthetic for him. They have a lot of characters. What's his name from Coco's there? And he's a skeleton, but it's
Oh
played by
yeah.
a person not in mascot costume. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah.
and I do think that we're going to see that change because of the Disney villain inclusion that's happening in the Magic Kingdom, and they're probably going to go way of Disneyland's Oogie Boogie Bash, and we'll probably stop seeing those mascot costumes for some of those villains. But yeah, I think it's very weird that they don't like whenever I see Captain Hook, I'm like, he's not that different from just doing Captain Jack Sparrow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's not a far reach, guys. So and the movie Hook, which is not a Disney movie, they made him look just like the Disney movie. It's possible. It could be done, is what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Anyway, what's
Yeah.
your next question?
So, and well, actually, that was it because we'll save the other two
Okay.
for when we do the movie discussion because the other two are strictly like about Disney movies. So, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, of course.
Tell us where people can follow you, but also the Mutant Ages. Love is an open door. And then
Yeah. Oh
since
my
since
goodness.
Rachel's
Talk
had to
about where
leave.
she is. Yeah. Well, I can tell you right now that Rachel is on Instagram at hipster_mouse because she is a hipster Mickey Mouse. That is the main place that she posts to. I'm all over like well, I wouldn't say Facebook, but you can find me on Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, all that under Roller Ryan or Roller Ryan Skate with an 8. Um, you can also catch Rachel's and my podcast, Love's an Open Door. It's fairly new as of a few months ago, where we go through all these different media properties of Disney. Let me just rephrase that again. Let's go through all these Disney media properties and analyze the queer coding of them. But also, we talk about a little bit of everything. We just did Encanto. We talked about the trauma. And then my main podcast that's now at 7 years old, going on 8 pretty soon, is the Mutant Ages, which is our X-Men podcast, breaking down the queer coding metaphors of the X-Men, watching every adaptation of the X-Men. It has become a much bigger thing than just queer coding. If you liked our conversation about trauma, we talk a lot about that over there. And we also talk about sort of like the psychology of the X-Men and sort of like looking at mental health from a greater lens. And there's a whole community based around that now. So I am going to plug that while I'm here. So yeah, that's my stuff. And if you really want to find my Disney World videos, they're online under Ryan's Adventure Life. If I continue that or not is TBH, to be TBD, TBD. It's been a few months and I haven't done it. And I'm kind of thinking no, but those videos still exist if you want to go watch some Disney adventures. And Rachel is in some of them, so yeah,
Awesome.
I recommend it. Yeah,
Well, thanks for doing this.
yeah, of course.
And we will again be in touch for the Disney movie discussion and your five timer NFT. I'm gonna be
NFT.
I'm going to be clear and say they're NFTs. They're not
You
real
can buy it
pets.
for $3,000.
Have a great day. Thanks.
Take care.